The Ampatuan Massacre, a dark chapter in Philippine history. In November 23, 2009, a convoy of 58 people set out on a mission that should have been routine, filing the candidacy of Esmael Toto Mangudadatafor, governor of Maguindanao, Philippines. Mangudadatafor, a rising political figure, sought to challenge the dominance of the Ampatuan clan, a powerful and feared political dynasty. The Ampatuans had ruled Maguindanao for nearly a decade, maintaining power through intimidation, corruption, and a private army. Their influence extended beyond local governance. They had ties to the national administration, granting them near absolute impunity. Undul Ampatuan Jr., son of then-Governor Undul Ampatuan Sr., was being groomed as the successor. When Mangudadatafor announced his candidacy, the Ampatuans saw it as a direct challenge to their rule. Mangudadatafor had received multiple death threats, warning him not to run. To minimize risks, he sent a delegation led by his wife, Ginelyn Mangudadatafor, his sisters, legal advisors, and supporters, along with 32 journalists, the largest group of media personnel ever deployed for an election coverage in the Philippines. He believed their presence would deter any attack. But what awaited them was pure horror. The ambush, a premeditated slaughter. At 10 a.m., the convoy was stopped at a checkpoint manned by over 100 armed men, a mix of local police officers, paramilitary forces, and Ampatuan private militia. Instead of allowing them to pass, the armed men forcefully diverted the convoy to a remote hillside in Sitio Masalawi, Ampatuan town. Waiting for them was a backhoe, proof that this massacre was planned in advance. What followed was one of the bloodiest mass killings in Philippine history. Red Circle women were raped, mutilated, and shot at close range. Many had their clothes torn off, indicating brutal sexual violence. Some had been shot in their genitals and breasts, showing signs of excessive cruelty. Red Circle men were tortured, beaten, and executed. Many were shot in the face and head, making them unrecognizable. Some had multiple gunshot wounds, while others were hacked with bladed weapons. Red Circle journalists were executed on the spot. Many had their cameras and recording devices destroyed. This was meant to silence them, to prevent the outside world from learning the truth. Red Circle, even passers-by, were not spared. Farmers and motorists who were in the area at the wrong time were killed alongside the convoy to eliminate all possible witnesses. The bodies, along with their vehicles, were buried using the backhoe, an official piece of government equipment controlled by the Ampatuan administration. The killers worked swiftly, but when authorities arrived, they had not finished covering all the evidence. Bodies lay half-buried, blood soaked the ground, and bullet-ridden cars were still visible. Who was responsible? The brutality of the Ampatuan clan. The massacre was masterminded by Undul Ampatuan Jr., who had personally led the armed group. His father, Undul Ampatuan Sr., and other high-ranking family members were complicit. For years, the Ampatuan clan had maintained control through a culture of fear. They had over 2,000 private armed men, many of whom were government forces paid with taxpayer money. They used their power to manipulate elections, silence opposition, and eliminate political threats. Undul Jr. personally participated in the killings, showing no remorse. Government forces, instead of protecting civilians, assisted in the slaughter. The Philippine government had armed the Ampatuans under the guise of fighting insurgents, unaware that these weapons would be used for mass murder. This was not just a political rivalry gone wrong. It was a premeditated act of terror, the global outrage, and the fight for justice. News of the massacre shocked the world. International organizations, human rights groups, and journalists condemned the barbaric killings. It was declared the single deadliest attack on journalists in history. The United Nations, Reporters Without Borders, and multiple nations called for immediate action. However, for the victims' families, justice was agonizingly slow. The trial lasted 10 years, plagued by delays, corruption, and witness intimidation. Some witnesses were assassinated before they could testify. The Ampatuan family used their wealth and power to stall the case. Finally, on December 19, 2019, after a decade-long legal battle, Undul Ampatuan Jr., Zaldi Ampatuan, and 26 others were convicted of multiple murders. They were sentenced to life in prison without parole. But over 80 suspects, including police officers and Ampatuan allies, remain at large. The ongoing struggle, is justice complete? Despite the landmark conviction, many questions remain. Over 80 suspects are still at large, including police officers who assisted in the crime. Some fear that these individuals could still wield influence, especially in local politics. Meanwhile, press freedom in the Philippines remains under threat. Journalists continue to be harassed, intimidated, or even assassinated. The massacre should have been a wake-up call, yet political killings still persist. The slow pace of justice reveals the deep-rooted corruption in the country's political and judicial systems. For true justice to be served, all perpetrators must be held accountable, without exception. The aftermath, a nation still healing despite the convictions, the Ampatuan Massacre remains a dark symbol of political violence, impunity, and corruption. In many provinces, political dynasties continue to dominate, and election-related violence persists. Many journalists in the Philippines still face death threats, harassment, and even assassination. The massacre may have happened in 2009, but the dangers it exposed still exist today. Never forget, the Ampatuan Massacre was not just a crime against 58 individuals. It was an attack on democracy, press freedom, and the rule of law. More than a decade later, the lessons must not be forgotten. Light bulb, how can we ensure this never happens again? Demand accountability. Corrupt politicians must face consequences. Vote wisely and support electoral reforms. Protect press freedom. Journalists must be able to report the truth without fear of assassination. Educate and remember. Share the stories of the victims. Teach future generations about the dangers of unchecked power. The families of the victims continue to seek full justice, and it is up to every Filipino to ensure that this massacre is never erased from history. Only by learning from the past can we build a future free from fear, corruption, and impunity. Can we remember the 58 lives lost? We fight for justice. We say never again. If you enjoyed our video, please leave a comment for further discussion, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Sokran.
I'd say